So our second speakers are both both based in Luxembourg at the moment. You've already shortly met one, Katja Rausch, who asked a question, an excellent question before. She is the founder of the House of Ethics, which is a cross-industry and multicultural research and information hub in Luxembourg, and is co-presenting with Dr. Daniela Proverbio, who is a postdoc at the University of Luxembourg at the moment, although we did hear that he will be moving down to Italy at some point in the next year, which is great for him. So their talk is entitled Swarm Ethics, a New Collective and Decentralized Ethics in the Digital Age. And we've just heard this idea of swarm ethics just then in the previous talk, so I look forward to hearing more about this. The stage is yours, Katja and Daniela.
Oh, thank you so much. Where are the slides? The slides have gone.
I can share the slides if necessary.
Where? No. I think Daniele. Why are my slides gone? I don't see it. That's very bizarre. Just wait a moment. We were there. Bravo. I know. I see now what happened. Yeah. I have too many windows open. Excuse me. So, is it okay? Do you see what's going on? What's swarming on the screen? Yes. Good. So first,
good, thank you.
Okay. So first, let me say good morning, Chicago. Bonjour, Chicago. So as you said, we are calling from Luxembourg. We are calling from it's 2-3 p.m. in the afternoon. But before starting our presentation, we would really like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to share with you our novel concept of swarm ethics, a new collective and decentralized ethics in the digital age, and especially today with you at the Illinois Institute of Technology. And in line with our concept of emerging collective ethics, we decided to co-present today with Daniele and myself. So I hope that's okay. You know, a year ago, when we started to research on swarm ethics, little could we imagine how fit and how fast swarm ethics needed to be operational, especially after November 2022 with the explosion of ChatGPT, which changed considerably the technological landscape. And more generally, generative AI. And what we have seen is that these large language systems, well, they sit on an ethical permafrost. We saw that technology, like James also said in the previous presentation, has outpaced ethics and regulation. And in such a disruptive, non-linear, complex environment, well, conventional ethics seems to fail. And that's why we introduced swarm ethics, which actually thrives in complex, open environments and non-linear universe. So let's start the presentation and go immediately to the core of swarm ethics, the concept. Well, swarm ethics is a new concept. It is a new concept compared to traditional ethics, which is more individually centered and sits on a heritage of philosophical and cognitive roots. Swarm ethics, on the contrary, is about collective intelligence. It leans on swarm intelligence. And it is multidisciplinary. In our case, we look to or add 3 different disciplines: anthropology, complex systems, and digital technology. And it's exactly this mix which makes swarm ethics more than just a concept, but it allows it to be a new system. it actually transcends the conventional system of ethics, which is a closed system, a closed epistemic system where we have inherited values, be it by virtue ethics, consequential ethics, deontological ethics. But with swarm ethics, we move in an open system with collective, emergent, and self-organizing interaction, which means that we have autonomous, interacting agents, multiple agents, which are reviewed or which are regarded as open systems within a hyper-connected environment, which is per by itself an open system as well. And this is where collective ethics is shaped in real time. It is fast and rapidly scalable. And the question now is to see why now? Why has swarm ethics now its momentum? And at this point, I will hand over the presentation to Daniele. So Daniele, please, if you want to go.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Katja. I also share with you all my thanks to being hosted here, and the congratulations for having organized such an intriguing conference. So let me get started already going with a deep dive into the concept. I apologize at the beginning since I will introduce and use a lot of concepts from the theory of complex systems. If anybody is not completely familiar and comfortable with them, I will be very happy and pleased to answer any questions later on. So the very beginning, as an assumption, is that ethics is an emergent phenomenon from social moral molecules. I use a little bit of a distinction, perhaps going a bit further with respect to the usual terminology, but now I use moral as the guiding behavioral principles of single persons, whereas ethics, as I will explain later, is mostly referred to the emergent phenomena linked to the cross links and sharings between people. But let's follow a little bit the presentation so to give you a clear idea. The very starting point is we as people are interconnected into societies, and this comes more and more true in the digital age, in the age of social networks, in the age of fast sharing of information. If we consider each of us as having these moral, again, molecules, moral singletons, we can interpret a society as a distribution of such ideas. Then when a third-party bystander, being it a scholar or anybody looking from above or outside such society, looks at what goes on into the population, potentially he or she might recognize some mean behavior. And this mean behavior that emerges from the cross-sharing of those various ideas can be labeled as ethics. So the strong but potentially useful and generative assumptions that we use is that there is no engraved consequential or deontological ethics, but instead there is a consensus from swarms, from networks of ideas coming on together, potentially clashing, potentially contributing, and eventually synchronizing. So in this slide, I will just compare briefly what traditional ethics and what swarm ethics share and differ. In traditional ethics, we are talking about Western ethics that has been developed over the centuries, actually, the millennia, which is mostly virtue-based, deontological, consequential, particularly built upon individual intelligence, talking about the evolution of cognition within individual as a process, but still as a personal individual process that is mostly regarded as normative and mostly regarded as top-down, so from a central authority, being it natural or, well, let's call it political as an umbrella term, and mostly slow or even granitical. Instead, swarm ethics is seen as a pluricultural phenomenon, which is based on anthropology and behaviors, and is based on the complex systems theory, as previously mentioned. It thus gives rise to swarm intelligence, a collective and self-organizing intelligence that is driven by perception interaction and adopts the emergence from collective actions. Most importantly, rather than top-down, and here we connect to the previous presentation, this is fully horizontal, without needing any centralized control, but instead being led by the horizontal sharing and mingling of people. And most importantly, it is fast, particularly in the current age. This will come in the next slides, for which give you again the talk, Katja.
Well, thank you, Daniela. Well, we all know if we talk about systems, for a system to be effective and efficient, we need functional catalysts. And we have identified 3 different catalysts on 3 different levels. First, the mechanism level, the driver level, and the architecture level. So the first catalyst for swarm ethics answers the question, how does it work? Swarm ethics is based on perception action versus the traditional approach, which Daniela just explained, which is the cognitive, the moral maturity approach that you reach after an individual cognitive process. Like Lawrence Kohlberg explained it quite fast. In this case, we see that humans are fully acknowledged as complex and open systems within complex and open systems. And what we do, we actually add a layer of polysensory intervention. And that's different, which allows each autonomous agent to be dynamic and responsive and open within a mutant open system, where we do have synchronic movements that are created out of disorder. On the second level, we have the drivers. The drivers actually answer the question, what are the drivers for this perception action within swarm ethics? And we have identified 2 drivers. The first driver is mutuality, imitation, and the second one is empathy, care. And here we lean on the works of René Girard and his mimetic theory, in which the next other is always the one who influences you. So we are surrounded by 360 degrees by next others. So the mutuality, the imitation is extremely important in an open system as open agents. And then we have also looked to the work of the Dutch ethologist Frans de Waal. And Frans de Waal, who primarily studied the collective behavior of primates, and identified empathy as one of the most important, let's call it group tissues for primates to pursue their ultimate goal, which is survival. And he transposed this idea into human societies and human systems, where empathy actually is one of the main drivers. And we talk about ethics of care, Karen Gilligan. So it has been developed over time and is more related to modern theories than the millennium, or how should we call it, traditional, conventional ethical theories. And then we have the third catalyst, which relates to, well, actually at this point here, this is where the magic happens. This is where chemistry happens. This is where collective swarm intelligence meets individual emotional intelligence, through empathy, mutuality, and that drives the swarm ethics. So the second catalyst, mutuality and empathy within an open system with interacting autonomous agents, is extremely important. And all of this, the first and the second catalysts, are only possible because of the third catalyst, the architecture. Swarm ethics is built on systems theory. And thus it goes beyond cybernetics, like we know it by Norbert Wiener, or first and second order cybernetics by Heinz von Förster, and early systems theories. Because here we address open systems, not closed systems. And actually there are open systems within open systems that thrive on exchange of information, stimuli, and dynamical interaction. And that's the work of Ludwig von Bertalanffy in his the theory of open systems in physics and biology. So the environment we all thrive and interact in, like Daniele said, the moral molecules we are, one could even say it is a digital biosphere, which is open. And of course, well, it is nice to have an architecture, but still how to implement and how to deploy it. And that's why you need characteristics. And the first and most important characteristic, and we heard that also in your presentation, James, is that we are not talking about the top-down model here. We are not talking about the bottom-up model, but we are talking about the horizontal grouping of autonomous and interacting individuals, or like we can call it, moral molecules in a digital open biosphere. The second characteristic is based on polysensory perception action as opposed to the cognitive, personal, evolutionary process towards moral maturity that we have been confronted with in early ethical theories. And swarm ethics, like swarm intelligence, follows simple rules, principles. We don't like to call it principles, we like to call it catalysts. And we just saw them before, it's imitation, care, and purpose. And even purposes. It uses omni-channel communication. What does it mean? It means that by any time, all the time, all the autonomous agents are constantly by 360 degrees under interaction. We can never not interact. It's like not to communicate is not possible. And this is why we have rapid information sharing and massive swarm building. That's the acceleration, that's the pace of swarm ethics. The fifth characteristic without which swarm ethics would not exist is digital tools. It needs digital tools in order to synchronize, to scale and to amplify the swarm. And that's why it's fast. That's why it's proactive. That's why it's not reactive. And the sixth and last characteristic is that swarm ethics finds extremely high potential in any kind of community, in any kind of social grouping, be it associations, be it businesses, education, or politics. And which actually we like to look upon is the fifth characteristic, which is the importance of digital tools. And for that, I will turn again towards Daniele, who will explain the importance of digital tools when it comes to swarm ethics.
Absolutely, thank you again. In this case, we concentrate on the importance of digital tools for the rapid scalability of how those emerging groups thrive. Let's have a look at what usually happened historically. We can understand and model previous ways of diffusing ethical principles in basically two ways. The first one is having single thinkers behaving in hubs, like the central dot, connecting to the others. And they kind of behave as trendsetters. I know it's a little bit like trivialistic potentially when we talk about Kant as being a trendsetter, but technically speaking, this is it in a theory of a network. Or on the opposite side, we might have very small networks, so small circles, clubs, even talking and sharing opinions and information very slowly, also because of the speed of information sharing. Today, this is completely disrupted. The digital age has connected people all over the world. We are talking from Luxembourg, from Italy, from New York or Chicago, and everywhere at the same time, at the same speed, with high frequency of information sharing. The internet, social media, and so on are particularly decentralized and scale-free, meaning that a few hubs exist, but very few. So regardless of the, echo chambers that surely exist, the potential of each person to spread its view all over the world and being affected by others is terrific. And in this case, it's particularly relevant to mention that we are not talking about relativism, about static relativism, so compartments, but rather as a pluralism of ideas that eventually get together and give rise to the swarms. In the next slide, I will just go through a brief case study that let us understand a little bit better the informative power of swarmetics. Because, for instance, it might help us to understand the rise of even polarization using the very same principles and assumptions. Again, you all know polarization, meaning like two separate groups standing on two completely opposite positions. Impressively, this can be explained, similarly to synchronization, by the same theory. And what changes is the individual, well, here I use an engineering term, the cost function, but referring to the presentation, we can talk about the moral molecule or even the catalysis that each person uses, not only for its own formation, but also to live into the society. If you tweak those parameters a little bit, you might observe the synchronization, the alignment of the different opinions eventually emerging into an overall ethics being recognized, or even to the emergence of this polarization, which again has understanding power that goes beyond what traditional ethics might suggest. And here I stress again what I was mentioning before about the swarming versus relativism, because in relativism, as it's normally conceived, is we have a compartment A, which might be, for instance, a region, a compartment B, a compartment C. Instead, in this case, even the polarization is something dynamic. It's not a static compartment, but something that continuously tries and evolves. So we now go towards the conclusion. I again hand over to Katja. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, when we talk about novel concepts, a novel concept is only valuable if it's applicable, if it offers practical opportunities and is anchored in the world, and if it has benefits for both the individual and corporate. And the fact is that here with swarm ethics, we have manifold opportunities. The first one, since swarm ethics is purpose-driven, it can be used as a shaping tool, a purpose-setting tool for responsible technology. Right now, we are talking about AI ethics, responsible AI ethics, about trustworthy technology, about fairness. Well, in such a case, a swarm ethics, a collective emerging ethics can be a methodological tool to for purpose setting. And it's not just constrained to technology. It can be used in finance, in ESG, in education, in healthcare, since it is purpose-driven. And the purpose swarm ethics is trying to achieve is a common purpose. It's a purpose that benefits everybody. It is pluricultural. And this is extremely important because we are talking about open systems. And normally what we observe when we talk about ethics, it is the hegemony of Western ethics. The polarization, ethical polarization of Western ethics, which sometimes is also source for biases and discrimination. Swarm ethics is and has a transformational power. It is an energy that nurtures inclusiveness and diversity because it is an open system with many interactions incessantly and at large scale. And here, this transformational power is important and can be a shield towards biases, towards discrimination, group discrimination, which we will see more and more, not individual discrimination. Swarm ethics, because the swarms are mutant, is agile. Like Daniele said, it is decentralized and highly adaptable. It is proactive to different levels and geographies. And most importantly, one of the major opportunities for swarm ethics as an open system is that it acts as an ethical augmentation. And it fosters human rights because, like we have seen nowadays, sometimes, well, privacy, data ethics has reached its limit. Regulation needs to step in and human rights need to step in as well, because human rights have absolute rights, which is not the case for ethics. When we talk, for example, about fragilized populations, elderly with Alzheimer, well, the question is not mostly a data privacy question, which is an ethical question, but it becomes a human rights dignity question. And we will see that more and more happening, especially in neurotech, with our brain data being absorbed, being monitored, being analyzed. And here, the absolute right of freedom of thought can be a fantastic ally to ethics as an open system to be much more hard at hitting, because the advantage of human rights is that you can track back on responsibility and accountability. And you can enact on it, which is sometimes not, and mostly not the case, like we have seen with generative AI. They just keep on flooding the market with tools which are set on, I call it data theft, and offer education for free. No, it is breaches, data breaches, IP breaches, intellectual property breaches at large scale. So this is where ethics has reached its limits and needs powerful allies. And that's what swarm ethics also is looking for, and changing its shape. This leads us to the conclusion, and actually our conclusion is an inclusion. It is an inclusion because swarm ethics is for people, by people, with people. It is based on multi-agent open systems, like we call them molecules acting in a digital biosphere, shaping together collective purposes. And we insist on the fact that it is purposes, like it is multiple ethics, and it has nothing of an absolute power or an absolute guideline. Swarm ethics is a booster, a democratic booster, through collective interaction and individual implication. And it also acts as a resilience and robustness builder, especially in worlds we used to call VUCA worlds, Barney worlds, where James, you talked about it, where uncertainty is king, and people are afraid of uncertainty. The black swan syndrome. So all of that swarm ethics, which is mutant, which is open, embraces that and uses it to move forward. So it is a resilience and robustness builder for individuals and couples. And to finish our presentation with a little metaphor, since we have to, we can generate these things too. We don't do Dali. Swarm ethics is a collective ethical generator that really empowers everybody, with empowerment for everybody. And this is where our presentation ends. And both Daniele and I, we thank you very much for your kind attention. And we are happy to answer your questions since we are open systems. So just
great. Thank you very much for this very, very interesting talk.